What's happening, everybody? Welcome to the channel. I appreciate you all tuning in. For the new people viewing, please check out my content. Hopefully you find something you enjoy there. And for everybody else, welcome back as always. I'm going to include a little news clip in this story right here for you guys to watch in a minute. But this is about the New York State Correctional Officers not being able to find work after Governor Kathy Hochul signed an executive order banning them from holding a state job inside of New York State, what they're calling being blacklisted. Okay. And so what exactly happened was the correctional officers, when they went on strike, as many of you heard, the strike was illegal. The reason the strike was illegal is because when a state employee signs their contract with the state of New York, that contract says that they are not allowed to strike, that a state employee is not allowed to strike. This is the deal made with the unions for state employees, which is what correctional officers fall under. Okay, it is called the Taylor Law. Many of you have heard that. So when these correctional officers decided to strike, what they were doing was not only violating their contract with the state of New York, they were breaking the law, because the law is called the Taylor Law. It is not a recommendation. It is not a suggestion. It is a law. And when you break the law, you're in violation. It is, almost a criminal act, right? You broke the law. So if a regular civilian was to break the law, right, we would be given heavy fines, or we would be incarcerated. So the correctional officers were warned of this during their strike, okay? They were warned several times. They were told to go back to work. The following Monday, Letitia James said if they didn't go back to work, she would think about putting them in jail. Then Governor Hochul extended the warning, and then told them that they had till the following Monday to go back to work. And if you watched many of the news coverage or the even YouTube coverage, the correctional officers were holding signs up that said, "Governor Hochul, can you hear us now? Governor Hochul, where are you now?" The famous line for the correctional officers that refused to go back to work was, "We're going to toe the line. We're taking this all the way." Then they were threatened with their health insurance being removed if they didn't return back to work. You see, after you're absent from work for 10 days in the Department of Corrections, you're considered AWOL. You're considered absent without leave, right? And so my point in saying all this is that the officers were warned for an extended period of time that they were breaking the law, that what they were doing was illegal. Right. But they decided to sit on the road and basically call the governor's bluff. So what happens in the end is that 2,000 many of them went back to work because many of them didn't want to lose their jobs. So they figured they would go back to work. But 2,000 of them were fired. And they were also told to appear in court in Buffalo, New York. They had to report in front of a judge. That court case is still ongoing. We've had correctional officers. We had a sergeant coming online on Facebook saying that he was debating committing suicide because he couldn't find employment and he lost his job after so many years, right? And so even though I was a prisoner, right, it's very hard. That doesn't sway my decision in looking at this as a critical thinker. And what I mean by that is I'm not letting the fact that I was a prisoner influence my decision or what I say regarding this matter. I understand that Governor Hochul signed the executive order. They were warned many times. That's just not a few words. That's a powerful statement. They were warned many times that if they didn't stop striking and return to work, they would be fired. Okay. And they would be fired because they violated the law. Right. And they can't hold a state job now. So because I violated the law and I was incarcerated, I'm not able to hold a state job. Right. I am now because I've been home over a decade. And then after you're home for a certain period of time, you can hold a state job again. But it hasn't been a period of time for them. They violated the law. And so they can't hold a state job. And now they want to cry about it, right? You can't cry about it now. It's too late, right? I said in many of my previous videos that these guys were going to have a hard time and they didn't know what they were asking for because they're in rural areas. A lot of the prisons are in rural areas. They're in upstate New York. Let me play this video for you real quick. Check out this video.
Executive order filed Tuesday prevents many state agencies from hiring fired corrections officers who participated in the illegal and unsanctioned statewide strike. Critics argue that the order also prevents local governments from hiring the officers in what one county calls an unconstitutional blacklist. 13 WAM's Daniel Finkelstein joins us now to break down the argument at hand. Daniel, good evening.
Good evening, Stephen. In defiance of that order, some county representatives argue the governor is overstepping. One of them tells me they're hiring. Mounting criticism of the executive order one day after the strikes ended and more than 2,000 New York COs received termination letters.
As a correction officer, as law enforcement, you build a skill set to work in your surroundings. And now that this executive order is being implemented, I cannot pursue what I've known for 14 years.
One former officer spoke out anonymously, saying they and others are now struggling to find jobs.
I'm taking, legal avenues and going from there on my part, but everybody has a different story.
The order directs state agencies not to hire any of the officers who participated and instructs docs to report them. If their state certifications are then revoked, they won't be able to serve. And some local governments looking to hire them aren't having it.
If there's an opportunity to absorb a displaced, experienced corrections family, and that experienced corrections officer meets our requirements, then he or she is going to find themselves working in Wayne County.
Wayne County Sheriff Rob Milby called the order underhanded. The chair of the Steuben County Legislature called it unfair.
We believe it is illegal for her to have done this. So I am applauding the legal challenge, and hopefully there would be talk amongst my legislature to join in on that.
On Friday, Chemung County announced a lawsuit arguing the order overstepped, creating an unconstitutional blacklist and undermining local hiring authority. Meantime, the former officer is left uncertain and frustrated.
I've taken different avenues. I've applied at, different federal jobs. I have applied different security jobs where it's not ran by the state.
And Stephen, a spokesperson for the governor's office told me they would not comment on pending litigation. Back to you.
So as you see in the video, right, they're saying that they've been blacklisted. They're claiming it's not fair. It's not about being fair or unfair, right? It's about being warned that you broke the law. And because you did that, you're basically on your own now. It's up to you to find employment. But they want to cry to the state because now they realize that their employment was really, really good, right? They had sick leave. They had paid vacation. They had retirement. They had pension. They had 401k, right? And they were very upset that they were working double and triple shifts. But the governor in the New Deal was ready to work with them on those double and triple shifts. The governor was increasing the salary of the correctional officer, right? The governor was revising parts of the HALT Act. You understand? So they could implement parts of the HALT Act again, which I disagree with in some areas, right? And so my point is that the governor worked with them and they still weren't willing to go back to work after this, right? And as the old saying goes, you reap what you sow. So as I was saying, they're in rural areas, and I don't know where they're going to look for work now. And they don't know where they're going to look for work now. And that's why they want to make such a big deal about this in the court of law. You see, now they're asking for judges to intervene. They're asking for attorneys to intervene, right? But in the long run, there's an abuse going on in the system. We know the story. Prisoners were getting killed. Prisoners were getting beat to death in mid-state correctional facility. Those officers have been yet to be charged in the murder of Messiah Notwe. Then we have the Robert Brooks case going on. We have another prisoner that was badly beaten in Mid-State Correctional Facility. We have the death of 7 prisoners that took place just during the course of the strike, right? A lot is coming to light about how abusive the correctional officers were, so they were taking advantage of a very, very good job that they had. So I wanted to inform you now that now these officers are unemployed. They're saying that an injustice was done to them. The bottom line is you can't violate the law, right? That's what you tried to teach all the men that were in prison, right? They violated the law and they were incarcerated for it. And I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not trying to be insensitive. I'm saying that the strike went on for over 20 days and you had a long time to think about the fact on whether you should take heed to the governor's order, right? Correctional officers, many of them, I'm not putting them all in the same boat. I told you there's some very good correctional officers, but there's some good guys that I got along with well and that didn't mistreat prisoners. There's definitely a percentage of correctional officers that are good guys, but there's an alarming number of correctional officers who let the power go to their head, who let the uniform go to their head. And they sat on that strike line saying, nothing's going to happen to us. Nobody ain't going to do nothing to us. We're officers. You can't tell us what to do, because they're used to having authority over people. You understand? But they don't realize that they don't have authority over the governor. Okay? The governor is the big dog. The governor is the one that runs the state. So in the meantime, if I were you guys, I'd be ready to go drive 20, 30, 40 miles to go find yourself some employment. Because even if you win in the long run in court, it's not going to happen overnight, and you had families to think about before you made that decision. You should have thought about your wives and your husbands. You should have thought about your kids at home. You should have thought about your mortgage payment. You should have thought about your car payment. You should have thought about your bills that you had a responsibility to take care of. But I guess you felt that the strike was that important. You felt that the strike was that important. You had to stand up for what you believe in. And I could respect that. I could respect that, right? You had to stand up for what you believe in, whether it was right or wrong. There's a lot of prisoners that you supervised that were in prison for standing up for what they believed in. There's a lot of guys that did that, and then they were found guilty and they were put in the prison system, because they stood up for what they believed in, and what they believed in may have been illegal. And you stood up for something that you believed in, and it was illegal. And so now you're paying the price for that. It's hard to find sympathy. I do feel bad. I'm a human being, and I know it's going to be a struggle for you now, but you guys had a lot of time to think. So that's what's going on with the correctional officers right now in New York State. It looks like it's going to end up in court, right? Everything ends up in court. That's the type of country we live in. Everything ends up in court. So we'll see what happens. You guys have a good day.